Welcome to Have You Read It, the channel where we bring books to life, one summary at a time. Today, we're diving into Yaroslav Trofimov's Our Enemies Will Vanish, the Russian Invasion and Ukraine's War of Independence. This book isn't just a historical account. It's a visceral, on-the-ground experience of the first year of the war, told through the eyes of a seasoned war correspondent. Trofimov, as chief foreign affairs correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, brings a unique perspective, having covered conflicts in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere. He was born and raised in Kyiv, giving him a personal stake in Ukraine's fight for survival. The book's core narrative revolves around the idea that this war didn't truly begin in 2022. Trofimov argues it's the culmination of an 8-year conflict ignited by the 2014 Maidan Revolution and Russia's subsequent annexation of Crimea and intervention in Donbass. That revolution, triggered by then-President Viktor Yanukovych's rejection of a deal with the European Union in favor of closer ties with Russia, was a pivotal moment in Ukrainian history. It demonstrated the Ukrainian people's aspiration for a different future, one aligned with Western democracies rather than Moscow's orbit. This was something that Putin, who had long dismissed Ukraine as an artificial country, couldn't tolerate. Russia's seizure of Crimea and parts of Donbass in 2014, while viewed as a victory by Moscow, was a strategic blunder. It turned the majority of Ukrainians decisively against Russia, shattering centuries of cultural and familial bonds. The war for Donbass created a new Ukrainian identity, forged in the crucible of conflict. Millions fled the Russian-occupied territories, creating a vast refugee diaspora even before the 2022 invasion. The occupied parts of Donbass became a showcase for Moscow's Russian world ambition, a land of economic collapse, banditry, and repression. The two proxy statelets, the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, were run by Moscow-appointed officials and enforced through military power. The 8 years between 2014 and 2022 were a time of rebuilding for Ukraine. Its armed forces adopted NATO training doctrines, modernized their equipment, and integrated volunteer battalions into the national forces. Importantly, a new generation of commanders came to the fore. Men like General Valery Zaluzhny, who had no history of serving in the Soviet military and were ready to challenge Moscow's authority. Even as Zelensky campaigned on promises of peace, the Ukrainian military was quietly preparing for war, knowing that Putin would eventually make his move. The prelude to the invasion was marked by a strange disconnect between American intelligence assessments and Ukrainian perceptions. Washington was convinced that Putin would attack, while Zelensky and his government downplayed the possibility, trying to prevent panic and disbelieving that Putin would risk such a foolhardy adventure. Few outside Ukraine gave the country much chance of survival. The overwhelming consensus in the West was that Kyiv would quickly fall and that the best outcome would be to support a lengthy insurgency campaign in a Russian-occupied Ukraine. But unlike the Afghan National Army, the Ukrainian military had no intention of surrendering. The invasion, launched before dawn on February 24, 2022, began with a massive Russian attack from the north, east, and south. Long columns of tanks, fighting vehicles, and troops poured across Ukraine's borders, aiming to quickly capture Kyiv. The Russians had planned for a swift victory, expecting the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people to fold. That expectation turned out to be fatally flawed. From the very beginning, Ukrainian soldiers fought back fiercely, ambushing Russian convoys and inflicting surprising losses on the invaders. The Battle of Hostomel Airport, a key part of the Russian plan to capture Kyiv, illustrates the war's initial phase. While Russian airborne troops managed to briefly seize the airfield on day one, Ukrainian artillery and airstrikes prevented reinforcements from landing. This bought precious time for Kyiv's defense and demonstrated that the Ukrainian military, despite Russian claims to the contrary, still controlled its skies. This early setback forced Moscow to adjust its plans. The Russian advance was swift in the south, aided by treason within the SBU intelligence service in Kherson. But in Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, Kryvyi Rih, and other cities, the local authorities rejected Russian offers to collaborate and organized fierce resistance, thwarting Moscow's hopes of a swift takeover. The Ukrainians were defending their homes, something the Russians hadn't anticipated. As Putin's blitzkrieg faltered, the war entered a new phase, a grinding battle for every town and every city. The siege of Mariupol became a symbol of both Ukrainian resilience and Russian brutality. Outnumbered and surrounded, Azov regiment fighters and Ukrainian Marines held out for weeks in the Azovstal steel plant as Russian bombs and missiles leveled the city. Ukrainian civilians, including women and children, sheltered in Azovstal's bunkers, enduring near starvation and unimaginable horrors. The world was shocked by the bombing of a maternity hospital and the destruction of a theater sheltering hundreds of civilians. These war crimes, denied by Russia, galvanized international outrage and strengthened Western resolve to help Ukraine. The atrocities committed by Russian troops in Bucha, uncovered after the Russian withdrawal from northern Ukraine, were another turning point. The scenes of executed civilians with their hands tied, of bodies left to rot on the streets, made any further negotiations with Moscow politically untenable. Kiev's new demand was for a full Russian withdrawal from Ukrainian lands and the prosecution of Russian war criminals. The war had become a fight for Ukraine's very existence. As Russia focused its attention on Donbass, the war turned into a brutal artillery duel. Wagner mercenaries, spearheaded by Prigozhin's convict recruits, played an increasingly important role in the fighting, achieving success in Popasna and elsewhere at a tremendous human cost. The Battle of Bilohorivka, where Ukrainian artillery decimated a Russian river crossing attempt, demonstrated that Russia's military might was far from invincible. Ukraine's Western partners, initially reluctant to supply heavy weapons, gradually overcame their fears of provoking Russia. The arrival of American HIMARS multiple-launch rocket systems in the summer of 2022 was a watershed moment. With their high precision and extended range, HIMARS started to systematically destroy Russian ammunition depots, command centers, and logistics hubs, disrupting Moscow's ability to sustain its offensive. The sinking of the cruiser Moskva and the destruction of Russia's Black Sea Fleet airbase in Saki were further evidence of Ukrainian resourcefulness and Russian hubris. As casualties mounted, Kiev had to make difficult choices. Holding on to Severodonetsk and Lysychansk for weeks, despite facing encirclement, allowed Ukraine to buy time and exhaust the Russian offensive. But it came at a terrible price in Ukrainian lives. The eventual Ukrainian withdrawal from the two cities, however, meant that Russia achieved its goal of capturing the entirety of the Luhansk region. It would be the last of Putin's victories in 2022. The Kharkiv counteroffensive in September 2022 was a stunning Ukrainian success. In a matter of days, Ukrainian troops liberated vast swaths of the region, forcing a Russian rout that exposed the hollow core of Moscow's military might. Putin's response, a sham referendum on annexing Ukrainian lands and a mobilization of 300,000 Russian civilians, further eroded his credibility and sparked widespread protests at home. The liberation of Kherson in November 2022, another major Ukrainian victory, was a final blow to Russia's ambition of quickly conquering Ukraine. While Russia still controlled a large chunk of Ukrainian territory, the war had entered a new stage, a grinding battle of attrition as both sides prepared for decisive offensives in the spring and summer of 2023. The arrival of Western tanks and fighting vehicles, long denied to Kiev, could make all the difference for Ukraine's ability to regain occupied lands. But the war had already caused immense suffering and had transformed Ukraine into a nation hardened by grief and loss, forever changed. The book's main takeaway is that even a small nation, united in its determination to defend its freedom, can stand up to a far bigger and more powerful enemy. Ukraine's success in repelling Russia's initial invasion and in liberating parts of its territory is a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of national unity. While the war's eventual outcome remains uncertain, Ukraine has already achieved its most important goal. It has proven to itself and to the world that it's a real country, one worth fighting for. Don't underestimate the underdog. Ukraine, given no chance at the start of the war, defied all expectations. National unity matters. A shared purpose, even in the face of overwhelming odds, can overcome internal divisions. Truth is a weapon. The horrors of Bucha and Mariupol, documented by journalists and shared worldwide, changed the course of the war. Adaptability is key. The Ukrainian military's embrace of mission command, a decentralized decision-making process, allowed it to react quickly to changing circumstances. Logistics win wars. HIMARS' targeting of Russian supply lines had a decisive impact on the battlefield. Propaganda is powerful, but reality bites. While Russia's disinformation machine might work at home, it fails when confronted with facts on the ground. Thanks for watching. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next book dive.